deepest stuff. Your words like silver, your touch like flame. With you I'll never be the same. Oh, Anatar, in your light I shine. Our bond is pure, and it's divine.
In episode 5 of The Rings of Power Season 2, we pretty much explore 2 main storylines and then kind of a little bit of a third. Primarily, this episode focuses on the dwarves with Durin and Duran and Disa, and Diesel, and Vin Diesel. And then also on Anatar and Celebrimbor in a region. And then the third plot is like Gil-galad looking somber and other elves talking to him a couple times. Mostly it's the other 2 plots. And some Numenor. I forgot about Numenor. So it's actually 3. It's 3. I'm sorry. There's so many different subplots in this show. The dwarves have lost their light, so they can't grow crops because the light shafts have caved in, and the ring that Celebrimbor and Anatar give to Durin the Elder allows him to sort of find where to dig to let the light in. Now you would think, well, okay, so in this imagining of Tolkien's work, it's the female dwarves who can sing and figure out where to dig based on their singing. But you would think that just dwarven engineers who are able to know the shape of the mountain they live in, and they could just dig up towards the sky where the sunlight comes through, you know? You wouldn't need a magic ring to find where to dig. You could just be like, hey, up there, if we just dig through the ceiling, light will come in. But this is meant to show how this ring of power, they say the rings of power a lot in this episode, how this ring of power allows Durin to magically find where to dig. There's even an extended scene of him digging himself through, just to show his insubordinate son and other dwarves what nincompoops they are. Durin the Younger and his wife Disa, who seems mostly jealous of the ring, are very, very, very concerned about the power of this ring and the effect that it's having on Durin, who is suddenly very greedy, and yada, yada, yada. Now, 2 things. First of all, if this show had been crafted and chronologically, written, this could have been a very interesting storyline. It could have been an interesting storyline to have Durin get the ring and start to, push his dwarves to dig deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually, of course, Durin's bane, the Balrog, is woken. But everything in the show is out of order, okay? So that's the second thing. The problem with all the suspicion that Elrond is showing to the 3 rings, and that Durin the Younger and Disa are showing to the Dwarven rings, and to what goes down in our other plotline with Anatar and Celebrimbor in Eregion, is that it's all out of order. It's all out of order. The way the order of the fashioning of the rings, right? They created the 3, then they created the 7, now they're creating the 9. It's the other way around. 9, 7, 3. Also, there was many other rings of power, lesser rings of power created before the big 20, right? The big 20 being the 9 for men, the 7 for dwarves, the 3 for elves, and the 1 ring at the very end. Everything here is out of order. Also, the corrupting influence of Sauron on the dwarven rings, on the rings of men, and ultimately would have been on the 3, but they hid the rings. All of that happens after the 1 ring is created. So again, this is just the reason that I'm having a hard time with this part, which could have been the core foundation of the early seasons of this show. Could have been the fashioning of the rings in order, the deception of Anatar over Celebrimbor, the fall of Eregion, the effects that these rings are having on the 7 dwarves, 7 dwarves, and on the 9 mortal men. Problem is, it's just all so jumbled now. And this is the problem with fucking with source material, right? When you condense everything and then you take the chronology and you just twist it all around, it stops making sense. It doesn't make sense to me, for instance, that Elrond would be so suspicious of the 3 rings, and that they would have a corrupting influence over anyone at this point without the One Ring being made. It also doesn't make sense that the Dwarven Ring would have this much of an impact this quickly on Durin. I think this would have been a really interesting thing to have play out over a whole season, where at first all the dwarves and all the elves are, or whatever, let's just stick with the dwarves. All the dwarves are like, wow, this ring is awesome. We are finding more treasure. We are able to craft better items. We are able to, it's giving us this power over our craft and over our, we're starting to be able to build more beautiful magical halls and da-da-da. They built the doors that the Fellowship finds when they go to Moria for the first time. Speak, friend, and enter. They show those off, which again just feels kind of like, actually this is probably the least offensive of the sort of references and callbacks that we've seen in this show so far, because that's sort of the thing that I would like to see in a show like this, a prequel show, is like those doors being fashioned by the dwarves and elves working together. Like, that's the kind of thing that makes sense here. It's just plopped down in so much other shit. So, anyways, I think that if you showed the rings, the Dwarven Ring in Khazad-dûm working all these wonders, and then if you somehow, tied it in to when the One Ring is fashioned, that those wonders, that then you start to see the corrupting influence over Durin, over the dwarves, and then you start to see the fall of the Dwarven kingdoms, right? Because the Dwarven rings brought about the downfall of the Dwarven kingdoms, right? Dragons came, Balrogs came. They drew in these calamities, essentially. And I think it would have been a great thing to show that sort of happen over time, organically, in conjunction with the One Ring being fashioned. However, we're getting this all out of order, and it all feels very rushed. And right off the bat, Durin, Elrond, right off the bat, these characters are suspicious right away. I would be fine if they had shown Elrond and Galadriel as being suspicious of Annatar, which they were. Celebrimbor then being fooled by Annatar because of his pride. There's all this stuff that they could have done that just was in the source material that they jumbled up because of how they told in season 1 this whole Halbrand story, and how they have Galadriel just being such a hothead when in fact she was suspicious of Annatar, and she and Gil-galad were suspicious of him, which is why he went to Celebrimbor instead and manipulated him. The manipulation of Celebrimbor has been all jumbled because he's already met Halbrand. Then Halbrand comes back and changes to Annatar right in front of him. And I don't know. Honestly, it is still probably the better part of this show, seeing Annatar manipulate the elves. But it just makes me think we could have had a much more in-depth story about this in season 1. That could have been a great starting point for that subplot, for that plot. But the third plot then is Numenor, and here we have Al-Pharazôn taking power, and his snivelly little son, the dweeb boy, causing trouble, and they go to a temple where they're going to apparently use eminent domain to destroy the temple and put an aqueduct through. I'm not sure I follow exactly their thinking here. It just feels so divorced from what would actually be happening in a city like this. They're not going to be tearing down temples. It just feels like, let's make these guys cartoon villains, right? Let's just make them as cartoonish and villainous as possible. Whereas I think that a much more interesting portrayal of Pharazôn would have been that he was actually a great man who is corrupted by power. Because in the source material, again, he is a great leader and general, and he defeats Sauron. The force of the Numenorean army is so vast and powerful and intimidating that when Sauron's army meets it, they actually run away. They just run away. It's not even a battle. They just turn around and run, and that's when Pharazôn captures Sauron. Now, if this show was sticking to the books, instead of all this, like, they took our jobs, like, anti-elfism, they would have had Farazan actually be a great leader, who we see then corrupted and fall from grace and become, you know, as one of Sauron's puppets, while Sauron's in his captivity. And then you could see, you know, everything that happens then with Elendil and the Fall of Numenor and everything else. Effectively, this show could have been Sauron going from one great city to the next, corrupting and destroying the great bastions of elves and men and dwarves. And that would have been a pretty cool show, especially because then after he's effectively laid to ruin many of the great cities of these civilizations, then you could have gotten to that battle where, you know, Elrond and Isildur and everybody shows up and actually, you know, defeats Sauron and cuts the ring off of his hand. And then Isildur takes it, and we know what happens next. So there was so much potential to, I mean, and not even stick. I'm not one of those people that says you need to stick to the letter of the source material. Clearly, there's like so much there you'd have to pick and choose. But what's there is really good stuff. And dramatized, put into a narrative format, could have been really, really interesting. Instead, it's just like the potential for like these characters like Celebrimbor and Farazan to be really great, interesting characters whose fall from grace we really care about and which affects us is no longer there. So instead, we get this goofy fight in this temple with Dweeb Boy and the Isildur's friend Velendil. One point before I get to this, that's how I sort of, he looks very Mediterranean to me, and I sort of, I think of Numenor as like a Mediterranean city, like Rome or you know, ancient Greece or something. I feel like that's where they should have had all the people look like him, like Velendil, sort of olive-skinned, Mediterranean-looking. I don't know why we couldn't do that. Like, this is what I keep going back to with diversity and in this show, is instead of just like a grab bag of different racial races in every location, you have like the Mediterranean city with the darker skinned Mediterranean looking Numenorians, and then you have, you know, the elves from the wood elves, they could be, you know, black, and you could have the Stewars in the desert be black, and you could have and then as these characters, you know, go to different places, they're like, they see different people that look different from them, because that's how the world actually works, unless you're living in, you know, LA or London in the modern time, which this show does not take place in. Anyways, they get in this fight, and Velendil is about to kill Dweeb Boy when Elendil is like, no, put it down. Good boy, put it down. So he throws the sword on the ground and turns around like this with his back to Dweeb Boy. And it's like, yeah, he's going to get stabbed. He's going to stab him. He's about to stab him. Yep, and sure enough, of course, because this show is just built on the most obvious and like tropey filmmaking techniques. Yes, Dweeb Boy stabs Isildur's friend, and he dies. And they're going to blame it all on Elendil. This whole like manufactured conflict in Numenor, it could have been so much better. There could have been so much more depth to these factions. And instead, it all feels very, very, very cheesy. I fell asleep about 4/5 of the way through this episode. To be fair, I was very tired. I got up a little too early to go hike my dogs and then watch this right afterwards. But it was so boring that I fell asleep. Had to wake up and then rewind a little bit and start again. But it was during this scene that I fell asleep, during the big conflict in the temple, because it's just so hard to care. One other problem with the prequel, of course, is that most of the main characters, we know what's going to happen with them, especially characters like Isildur, who wasn't in this episode, but you know, this is his, in a lot of ways, the Second Age is leading up to the story of Isildur and the choice he makes at the end of the age, and it's just sort of hard to care when you know what's going to happen. That's something that even a good show would have a problem with, right? But a good prequel, and I think maybe the best example I can come up with, is Better Call Saul. A good prequel introduces you to a lot of other stuff that you may not know what's going to happen with. Like in Better Call Saul, we didn't know, what was going to happen with Kim. or a lot of the other characters that were introduced, like his brother. So we got a lot of compelling drama, even though we ultimately do kind of know mostly what's going to happen with Saul himself. It's really hard to make a good prequel, I think, and that's another reason why sticking a little more closely to the guideposts created by J.R.R. Tolkien would have been useful here for the creators of Rings of Power. Overall, just another kind of bland episode, I have to say. Like, it wasn't as... I didn't feel like it was quite as cringy as the previous episode, which just had so many Easter eggs and callbacks and member berries. This was a little bit more its own thing. But there were still some of that stuff. There were still some of those things. And overall, just... I don't know. I just... Even when I'm not as dismayed by goofy nonsense, it's still just boring. It's still just so out of order that it doesn't make sense to me. It's hard to watch this show when it's everything feels rushed and jumbled and out of order. So that's where I'm at on this one. Let me know what you thought. What did I miss? Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell. Peace.
Oh!